The streets were chaotic. Cars had been abandoned, their doors hanging open, some even torn apart by the hinges due to the pure rage possessed by the creatures all around Channing. The windows were shattered, tarmac covered with broken glass. Meanwhile, people ran in every direction, their screams echoing through the air. Channing could not understand what was happening. One moment, he was simply walking home from work. The next, the world plunged into complete madness. His gaze roamed over the brutalized street as he struggled to comprehend the scene before him. A part of him knew what he was looking at, but he still could not absorb most of it. The creatures, which everyone called zombies, looked human, but were disturbingly inhuman at the same time. Their skins were gray, and their manner was erratic. It was as if life had been sucked out of them with a straw, leaving nothing but flesh and bone behind. It was terrifying to watch their jerky movements and hands with long fingers. Channing could see how they were either breaking things or people, tearing apart flesh. But what scared him the most was how they were changing people. A single scratch from their long nails was enough to infect a person, and within minutes, a living, breathing human would dissolve into lifeless mush. Channing did not want to succumb to that fate. He only wished to continue running. His breath coming in ragged gasps at the scene before him, he ducked into an alley, his heart pounding with fear. Virus had spread faster than anyone could have ever anticipated. Just until yesterday, he had been hearing news about it spreading in other parts of the country, with a promise from the government and the military to contain it before it spread any further. But today, it had reached his city, and Channing knew that even the strongest military forces would be powerless against it. Whatever this thing was, it was certainly unstoppable. One bite, one scratch, and you were gone. At this point, he did not know if death was the better option, or was it turning into these creatures. Even from his hiding spot in the alleyway, he could both see and hear it all happen. A man on the street was writhing in pain before his eyes as the infection took hold of him. Within minutes, he had turned into a zombie, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, his movements turning jerky and erratic. Everything that classified him as human once was immediately taken out of his body, turning him into nothing but a death sentence. Channing looked up, realizing that the man who had just turned into a zombie was heading straight towards him. Channing knew he had to run, but the streets were still full of them. He did not know where he was going to go, his mind refusing to function. It almost felt as if he was trapped, and he needed to do something about it. With the zombie chasing right behind him, Channing ran forward as quickly as he could, his gaze landing on a large trailer van parked at the end of the alley. It seemed like a fully equipped delivery man, one of the modern ones with every facility inside it, as if the delivery drivers were going to stay in there forever. Noticing that the back doors were slightly ajar, Channing took it as a sign, running towards it with no hesitation whatsoever. He sprinted towards the men, hoping his best to run away from the zombie, his boots crunching over broken glass. With a long jump, he placed his foot on the threshold and climbed inside, slamming the doors shut right in the face of the zombie. His heart rate was rapidly accelerating as he sat against the doors, almost waiting for the zombie to begin crashing the gate or scraping against the metal. Several minutes passed, but Channing heard nothing. Could the zombie have gone elsewhere? He was not sure. The van was dark from the inside, slightly cramped with tightly packed crates and supplies, yet untouched, perhaps abandoned in a hurry. But it was still something and appeared slightly safe, at least better than what was outside. Once he was certain that no one was going to come after him, Channing immediately stood up, ensuring that the doors were locked behind him. He double-checked the latches and even reinforced them with a metal rod he found in the van's toolbox. His body trembled with adrenaline, and all he wanted was to collapse, but he couldn't afford the risk. He quickly checked the two large windows on both sides of the van and realized the glass was still intact since it was break-free. Despite that, for extra safety, Channing closed the shutters, securing the windows with metal. After everything, he did not want zombies to find him or somehow manage to break into the van one way or the other. He could still hear them outside, their horrifying screams growing louder. Channing knew he would have to learn to live with them, since they were clearly not going anywhere anytime soon. The only good thing was, they would not be able to get inside the van. His vessel of safety, his sanctuary for the time being. Channing spent the next few hours exploring the van, realizing how he could turn on the lights since the whole thing was powered by solar energy that was connected to a generator just by the roof. What surprised him the most was the amount of supplies in the van, which included boxes of canned food, bottled water, and even a first aid kit. It seemed as if the delivery being done inside the van was for food items. He felt as if he had stepped on a gold mine in this midst of this absurdity, and he just could not believe his luck. One corner had a small camping stove, which was easily usable, and bed with a few blankets was hidden away at the other end. His heart leapt with happiness because he could sense he would survive here, at least for a little while. It did not take much time for the days to turn into weeks, and Channing settled into a proper routine. He had never been a morning person, but sleep rarely came to him in such difficult circumstances. Hence, he started to wake up at dawn every day and ate a small breakfast made from the tins of canned food he found all around the trailer van. To make sure he was not running out of anything and could still somehow manage to survive, he spent the morning rationing his supplies. He had enough food and water to last him for a few months, but he knew he could not stay in the van forever. He had even managed to set up a water collecting system through the roof of the van, setting up containers under a trickling hole through which he collected rainwater for use. The van had food, water, sunlight, and everything he could ask for. But how long was he going to stay safe inside it? The zombies had been ignoring it for too long, but Channing knew the only thing separating him from the zombies was a metal container that he was trapped in. They were right outside and could attack the van whenever they pleased. He could not depend too much on his luck. Their twisted forms shuffled past the van, day and night, as Channing watched them through the windows. It felt as if his heart was constantly beating a little too fast, making him feel terrible. He woke up with a jerk every night at the slightest of noise, wondering if it was yet another zombie. The living arrangement was clearly not sustainable, and Channing needed to do something about it. But he was not just sitting around, waiting for them to attack him whenever they pleased. He was constantly thinking, trying to find a way out of the mess he had been caught up in. He had already noticed a manhole cover in the middle of the street, just a few feet away from where the van was standing. Channing knew if he could somehow manage to reach it, he would easily manage to escape into the sewers, finding his way out of the mess he was caught up in. As a person who had never sought adventure or had even hoped to be caught up in a situation such as this, nothing made sense to him. But his only wish was survival. That was all he was asking for. Although, reaching the sewers was intense and risky business, because if the undead somehow saw him or suspected someone was inside the van, they would tear him apart. Relentless creatures like these zombies could not be trusted with anything at all. In the past few weeks, he had dedicated several parts of his day studying and understanding them in an attempt to learn their patterns. They were extremely drawn to movement and sound, but they were definitely slow and predictable as well. His only chance at reaching the manhole was moving the van inch by inch without it being noticed. He would somehow have to scour the entire street, and only when the place was completely deserted, he would drive the van forward just by an inch. It was going to be extremely difficult, but he needed to do it one way or the other. Despite this, the most dangerous part of his plan was simply starting the engine. The sound was going to be loud, and the zombies might be able to hear it, but if he managed to move slowly enough, their limited intellect might not really understand what was happening. His best chance was going ahead with this on 2 occasions. The first would be when the street was crowded and noisy, and the sound of the engine might go unnoticed, or in complete desertion, with none of the undead around. He knew it was time to give it a shot. The first attempt was nerve-wracking in every way imaginable. Channing chose the middle of the day for his first try, firing up the engine when the street was at its noisiest. Several people around him who were running from place to place stopped as they heard something which somehow made the undead aware about it as well. Channing immediately shut the engine off, knowing fully well this was not going to work. He could not risk being found. The next attempt had to be more discreet. Channing was so scared of possible discovery and potential attack that he decided to wait for the next few days. On the 3rd night after his first attempt, he waited until midnight, when the street somehow became deserted, most survivors trying to hide, and the undead out hunting in the fleshiest part of the cities. He fired up the engine again, his gaze strictly stuck to the windows he had left partially unveiled. To Channing's utter shock, the undead appeared from nooks and crevices where they were hidden in complete darkness, their glowing red eyes locking onto the van. He knew if he waited, the sound would only attract them even further. Hence, he held his breath and shifted the van into gear, letting it creep forward at an almost invisible speed. They shuffled closer, but he immediately turned off the engine while they continued to look on in complete confusion. They hadn't attacked yet. He kept surveying them closely from one angle, worried about what might happen next. He could see they were desperately trying to figure out the source of the noise, but could not truly place where it had emerged from. Just then, a loud shout on the street forced them all to run around, while Channing pressed his face on the window, trying his best to remain hidden himself. A young woman came running in, her leg twisted after hitting on a protruded footpath corner. She was still screaming in pain when the undead completely abandoned the van and ran after her, certainly excited for their next hunt. Channing's heart ached for her, his survival instincts clashing with his helplessness, but he knew that if he tried to help, both of them would be doomed. Even with his weapons and superior human intellect, he could not fight their numbers and brute strength. He truly wished to help the woman, but it was not in his hands. He turned away from the window, his ears assaulted by the loud noises on the street as the woman howled in pain while they must have bit and scratched her. Channing could hear her gargling and shouting, which meant she was turning into one of them, and only seconds later, the street echoed with a loud growl, which indicated that she had converted. It was all in the matter of a few minutes. Channing sat on the floor of the van, shaken, realizing that any noise, even unintentional, could bring disaster upon him. He had been lucky today with the emergence of the woman, but he won't be lucky every day. And the manhole was still at some distance. If he moved at this speed, he would still have to continue doing this for a few days, which meant more chances of discovery. What was he going to do? For the next few days, he moved the van towards the manhole every chance he get, moving it inch by inch at an achingly slow speed. It was slow, painstaking, torturous, and whatnot, but it was still working. He knew he had been surviving in this van for weeks now and could survive a little longer. Every day, he stood at the corner by the window and watched the manhole come closer. He could have never in his wildest dreams imagined ever being caught up in a situation such as this. Everything absolutely absurd. But it was his life now. But his only motivation was the decreasing distance. After weeks of careful maneuvering and strategizing to only start the van at extremely chaotic or fully deserted times, he could not believe that the van was finally directly under the manhole. He had done it, one way or the other. His heart raced as he realized he was exactly where he needed to be, the van right under the manhole. This was it. This was going to be his last step until he could take the next step towards finding freedom. He knew he still had a long way to go, but the agonizing pain of doing something as simple as this had been too much for him. He was proud of his success. Without wasting a single second, Channing grabbed a crowbar from the van's toolbox and began to pry open the floor. He needed to be silent, making sure the crowbar made no sound against the metal. That was extremely difficult work as well, and he almost wished to give up out of sheer exhaustion. But he had to do it. This was his only chance to escape toward safety, alive. He knew this did not guarantee anything at all, but it was at least worth a try. After working as patiently as he could for 2 straight days, Channing managed to create a hole large enough to climb through, staring at it with sheer surprise. He did not hesitate and quickly grabbed his backpack full of supplies, which he had already prepared. The supplies were already scarce after weeks of living in the van, and he did not have much to carry. He kept everything essential. He knew this might lead to his death, all his efforts in vain, but it was necessary. There was no way he could live in the van any longer. He lowered himself through the hole, trying to lift the manhole cover, which was extremely heavy. After using all the strength which was left in his body, he finally managed to lift it enough just to slip through. Just as he was about to slip his feet inside, the cover slipped from his grip, hitting the road with a loud bang. He froze, praying the undead hadn't heard it. Channing's heartbeat accelerated as he expected the undead to react, and only seconds later, a loud banging and scraping on the van alerted him of their arrival. He had no time. He needed to run now, or else he would have done all of this for nothing. Adrenaline pumping through his body, Channing opened the manhole once again, just enough to slip his feet inside, and finally managed to go inside completely, closing the cover above him once again. The darkness and dampness immediately disgusted him, the smell of sewage running through the pipes making him want to puke, but despite all of it, he still felt safe. He knew the undead would definitely not be able to follow him here. They might tear apart the van, but he was no longer in it, and they would never be able to come after him. Now all he needed to do was find safety. He knew what waited for him ahead was going to be even more difficult, but he would be fine. He would somehow make it work. His sense of direction might be flawed, but the apocalypse had taught him survival. He continued walking, his silhouette fading in the dim light which entered through small opening through the road. He could hear the city shouting, burning, and dying above him, but for the time being, he was safe. He would not be harmed. After weeks of hard work, he had finally achieved exactly what he needed, and he could not be happier about it. He was going to get away from this hell. He was almost certain